So, how will we know when Kristen here, who has that, Penny or?
Penny does.
Okay.
Ready for that walk. No, not this one.
Is someone else zoomed in now, Penny?
Lynn,
Okay, I don't have my long, I have my short term glasses on, not my long term.
good morning.
Okay, it's 8 o'clock. We'll close the select board meeting to order. Adjustments to the agenda. I have one. I'd like to add at the end of after appointments, personnel matter that I'm going to ask for a motion to end executive session. Anybody else have anything else? Public comment for item not on the agenda. Okay. Kristen is not with us, is that correct?
Yes,
She is with us?
no,
Oh, okay.
you're correct.
Why don't we move down then and take up the item 7 until she joins us. Okay, we have, this was added to the agenda late. We have a request from Theo Pratt for, I don't actually have the email in front of me, but I believe it was $100 to have the town become a member of the Maine Conservation Commission. Thoughts or?
I move we approve the $100 to join.
Okay, discussion, where would we charge this to? I was thinking we would charge it to that at the end of the budget, there's a couple of 2 or 3 with the cemetery. Right. Charge it somewhere, it's only $100. Okay, all right, further discussion? All those in favor?
Where are you going to charge it on?
I'll talk. Do we call Kristen? Or text? Because I know she has a limited time frame.
Relatively new.
Why don't we take up the appointments?
I would like to add an appointment to the list that I gave you. Eileen Scarker said last night she would serve on the appeals board, as long as she's not in charge.
Okay. So is there a motion on the appointments?
Yeah. Water as ambulance service director.
Second. Is that for a term of?
1 year.
Okay. There is a second discussion. All those in favor?
Questions?
Okay, well, let's finish. We can. Appointments. We'll be right with you. Since you're a couple minutes late, we a couple of administrative matters. We'll be right with you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me, guys?
Not well, but we'll be right with you. Go ahead, Walter, if you.
I move we appoint Terry Brackett, alternate CEO, until after town meeting in 2022, 1-year term, and alternate LPI until after town meeting in 2022, 1 year.
Second. Discussion, all those in favor? Is there another one? I think there's another one.
The designated mover.
Yeah.
Mover and
Get
shaker.
your hand dropped.
I move we appoint Corey Fortin, CEO, until after town meeting in 2022 for a 1-year term, and LPI, licensed plumbing inspector, until after town meeting in 2022 for a 1-year term.
Second. All those in favor?
And I move we appoint T. Hoffnagel, election clerk, until April 23rd, 2022. Second.
Discussion, all those in favor?
And Eileen?
Oh, yes, oh, the most important one.
Right. I move we appoint Eileen Skarka as a member of the appeals board.
For, what do we have for terms open?
I think it was a 3-year term.
Then let's grab
Let's take it.
it.
A 3-year term. The 25. I think we could. 4.
Discussion, all those in favor?
Thank you, Eileen,
Thank you, Eileen.
wherever you are.
John Hanson may thank her too. Okay, John, you're aware, you're not on until 9, or?
I'm aware.
Okay, I just wanted to show.
I like to attend these.
Yeah. Okay, Kristen, can you hear me? Hello?
Sorry. Can you hear me? I'm good. I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. I don't know if the audience can or not, so the more you can speak up, the better.
Okay.
Okay, before we start on this item, I just wanted to say a little bit of background. We initially set this meeting up today because the draft bylaws for the Mid-Coast Internet Coalition comments are due next, can't remember what it is, but it's the 25th or 23rd or something like that. And our regular meeting was on the 20th. So we felt that would give us time to comment. These were, the draft bylaws originally came out and it was a 4-day comment period, and I and some other folks objected to that, and that comment period was extended, and we appreciate that. So the primary purpose of this meeting was to talk with Kristen, our town attorney, about comments on the draft bylaws for the Mid-Coast Internet Coalition. When I talked to Kristen, meeting up, I told her what the town meeting vote, told her about the town meeting vote, which basically entrusted us with the decision, us as select board, would join or not to join the Mid-Coast Internet Coalition. Also the fact that we had a new member in Jeff. So Chris and I agreed that perhaps we should broaden this discussion a little bit beyond just, and that's kind of how we got here. So you two have anything to add before we?
You want to bring that Right here.
Sure. Kristen, I would just let you know that we do have a representative from Camden, from the Mid-Coast Indian Coalition, Matt Siegel, with us, present this morning, as well as 5 or 6 folks from the citizens of Thomasville. So I don't know how we want to approach this. I don't know if, Kristen, you want to lead us through this, or if the board members have comments that we'd like to get your reaction to. I know I have a couple comments, but thoughts on how we proceed with this? Do you have any preference, Kristen, or?
Have any preference? I'm sure that we have some of the same concerns.
Okay.
So I could give you my big 2, and maybe we can work from there.
Okay. And I should say, of course, the guy who emptied the can at the stump dump is pulling in with a truck right now, so that always happens. I should say that, Kristen, I understand you're on a timeline where you have to stop about a few minutes before 9, correct?
Correct. I think 9 will be fine, but
Hopefully it won't take that long, but if it does, we just need to keep that in mind. So Kristen, then why don't you start?
yes. And I think what I was going to say is, since we have limited time and, it just might go there, we might consider doing an executive session sometime between here and the comment deadline, just to, be able to talk more candidly if you feel like you need to, or just another session in general. So my big one, and I'm sure it's important to you, is the executive committee. It seems to me, that the standard mechanism of a nonprofit corporation board of directors would be that it elects officers, and the officers serve as the executive committee. And since the officers can be appointed, to include anyone from any town, it seems to me that that's the better representation to have on your on your executive committee, who's going to be running this corporation day to day for, the foreseeable future. So that is something that I think should be of some concern. I understand the interest. I saw Deb Hall's comments to John's comments about, these 2 communities should get something out of the fact that they pulled this all together. But I'm not sure that the right way for them to get something more out of it is to have the larger share of, rights in terms of running the corporation for the foreseeable future. Seems maybe more like, if there were formulas in here that weighted votes or weighted contributions and what the community gets out of it, maybe that's where, it more directly relates.
Can we just stop right there for 1 second? Yeah. I believe that requirement or setup is in the interlocal agreement as well as the bylaws.
It is.
That has passed, and I don't know, in a couple of communities, and it was passed, at least in Camden and Rockwood. I don't know how the exact wording was in Thomaston, whether it required the select board to do that particular interlocal agreement or for any interlocal agreement. But I think that that's going to be difficult to change at this point. I'm not disagreeing with you. That's one of my major concerns as well, but that's just a comment.
No, for sure. And this does come from the interlocal agreement. The agreements are revised the same way they're entered, and that there would have to be a town vote, to amend or revise them. Right. Really, that's my big thing. If there's anything that causes me more significant concern, it's that. But more broadly, I think the thing that is missing, it's not something that has to be in the bylaws, but could be, is contribution formulas and revenue formulas. So this corporation may not ever end up getting there, but it could end up being a revenue generating entity. And so, you know, what's the mechanism for distributing those revenues? So that's maybe my other biggie, but beyond that, I don't know if you all just want to bring up issues and maybe we'll try to go, you know, top to bottom.
Thoughts?
Yes, in general, my concern is the interlocal agreement and the bylaws happening before representation. I'm very uncomfortable with that just from a general point of view. I'm also trying to figure out how this organization is going to dovetail with the recently created state entity that is charged with doing this. And then the other piece is from a philosophical point of view. I'm not sure what the objectives of this organization is. I've heard several. I've heard better broadband. I've heard bigger pipes. I've heard 100 on 100. And if you look at the numbers, if you want to be eligible for any of the ARP money that is coming in, that's not a formula for getting access to it, because the ARP money says it is designed to get a certain level of ability, which right now we're at like 97% in the county, so it's hard to justify putting the ARP money towards this when I don't think it's actually. If those are the objectives, the objectives are to find all of the rural houses that don't have access to broadband. That's a different fish than what I think this is. And it's pretty obvious from the fact that it was started with Camden and Rockport, who probably have the highest level of access to broadband, versus South Thomas and Cushing, even Thomas and for that matter, Owl's Head. So I have a philosophical issue with the entire project. I am strongly in favor of getting increased broadband access to every town, every house in Knoxville. I just don't know that this is the way to go. Personal opinion.
Do you want to add anything, or?
Well, no, philosophically, I'm in favor of this, but I look at this as it's advertised, that it's a quasi-government owned utility. There are many steps and pitfalls between saying that and doing that, given the research that I've done says that these things, they're like startup businesses. Fail. So I'm on board in terms of passing a judgment. We actually see the feasibility study, and you know, I really came here today to hear what Kristen had to say. You know, as it affects our moving forward.
Well, Kristen, since we got you here, would you mind just walking down, since the bylaws really kind of spring forward from the interlocal agreement, and we all understand the interlocal agreement could be changed or be difficult to change. Not difficult, but could you walk down through the comments that you originally made on the interlocal agreement back a month or two ago?
Yes, if you
Kind of walk us through that a little bit.
yeah, give me 1 second to pull them up, but
Yeah, I can't find mine either. And I do want to get back before we close with some specific comments on the bylaws themselves, because I do have a couple of things there.
yeah, you know, you actually kind of threw me off because it was appearing that you wanted to just talk about the bylaws. I'm sort of prepared to talk about everything, but I want to talk just real quick about the issue that was just raised about, is it trying to extend service to people who have no service, or is it tended to really provide a fulsome, utility that would service everyone in any member town? I think that's a huge question because obviously it, directly relates to how the corporation should be set up, how it should be funded, et cetera. I have a concern about funding.
My understanding to that first question is both. But perhaps we can have Matt address that in a moment, but go ahead.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I mean, the thing for me is if it's intended to, run small lines to areas that don't have service, then let's say I would assume that South Thomaston, Cushing, Owl's Head would be, the most underserved in that regard, and maybe should get priority because, the per capita, the amount of underservice is higher. But I'm not sure that that's the way it's going to actually be set up. And that's such a huge, important question. If you're putting money into it, when do you reap the benefits of that money? Is the construction going to go, from some population center outward? Is it going to start with the most underserved? I know that probably all arises from the feasibility study, but it's certainly an important policy question in terms of whether this is all worth your while. And then in general, I'm, the broadband authority, the new organization, we're not sure yet what programs are going to be offered, but it seems to be so far a little bit more county centric, their focus. And, if this is being looked at as a regional or more of a county wide project, that might make sense to kind of wait and see what they're able to pull together.
Why don't I take 1 second and ask Matt to, since he's here and traveled down from Camden, to perhaps address that question of the purpose that Jeff brought up and you did, if that's okay. Matt, if you're willing to do that. Yeah, just briefly.
Yeah, no, I'll try to be
Yeah.
as possible.
Can you hear Matt? Kristen?
Yeah, I think so. Keep talking.
Speak loudly. Good morning, Kristen. It's Matt.
Hi, Matt.
I can't see you, but I see the back of the computer. I'll start with an easy one in terms of build strategy, and we can, John, if it's okay, we'll just kind of do a back and forth, more conversational.
Sure.
So in terms of build strategy, the initial build strategy was absolutely to start, which was why the priority was with South Thomaston, to the unserved and underserved for a number of reasons. Jeff, optics, service where nobody had service out here. That was clearly our priority, just so you know, out of the gate, in terms of back of the napkin, in terms of back of the envelope. We wanted to reach the small communities first. We would have higher take rates in those, again, based on our studies, that you guys, like type South Thomaston, would come on board in larger numbers because you had such crappy service. So the original plan was absolutely to start with South Thomaston and Owl's Head. That was, and then our base, our head would be in Thomaston. And that was where we're working from. And that's why, I was coming to you so and talking to Cliff. Then, just in terms of a brief narrative, a company named Otelco saw how successful this whole thing was and announced after our June 8th, again, we had warrant articles and we had your vote here a week later. They saw how successful this was going to be in these major dense areas. And Otelco announced they raised venture capital to basically kill us. And so our strategic plan, Kristen, had to change and had to just pivot. Because if Otelco, as they have now declared, comes in and builds high density red line districts, meaning where they're going to make a lot of money, and those districts would be the towns of Thomaston, Rockland, and Camden. That's where the money is to be made. So again, our original was not to do that. We were a universal open access model, but now given that they have announced that they have raised venture capital and will be building in the 3 places that we would use to have sufficient revenue for this business model. We have now pivoted, and we have to, if we're going to succeed for the whole region, to build in those 3 communities first. So again, I just wanted, that's one answer to one question.
So this utility is intended to run the system itself, including billing and everything else, or is the intention to franchise to one or more operators?
So the business model for the regional municipal utility is that the communities own the freeway, they own the assets. At that point, in terms of the tree, so you would have at the top of the tree something called the Mid-Coast Internet Development Corporation. That's what we would all sign on to join as directors. We'll come to that later. Then coming down from that, we contract as a board of directors an operator. And that can be a third-party operator, which is the best model that I researched, or it can be an existing ISP. So again, we have the board of directors on the development corporation, which is at the top, and normally Jeff, I use a board, a whiteboard, because I'm a professor. So without my whiteboard, at the top, we have the development corporation, and underneath that, in the tree, we have an operator, which is a professional in operations of this particular system. And then the board of directors down that tree, we are looking in this model to have 2 ISPs. Again, this idea, Walter, of open access, competition on the network, and we would contract 2. The goal is to have 2 players on our network. So the ISPs would do the billing, and they would do the maintenance, and they do the installations. Does that answer your question, Kristen?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry for shouting, but I don't know.
No.
I don't know if you can hear me or not hear me.
I can hear you just fine. So what's stopping Otelco from going down into these, into the peninsulas?
Terry Shekel and David Allen made it perfectly clear. There is no money to be made down here. They are not interested. They will not serve it. It's not part of their business plan, and she went over it. It was unsettling how reptilian they are about not serving people in need if it does not make a profit.
Density.
But the
Yes.
take rates down here would be high.
But
So
the density,
isn't it that the-
density would be very low.
Yeah,
But
so
then
they're
it's
looking
like
at
the-
return on investment in a different way as a private corporate. Again, you know this, Kristen. As a private corporation, they want to make profits at a certain level. They have a business model. As a nonprofit, we are in a different position. We are there to serve community. We are there to serve a region. And part of our mandate is not just the county, but we're working with coalitions throughout the state. That we really feel strongly that this is a model that will help communities survive.
Okay, my question though is, if the system were built out, would not Otelco or anyone like it want to operate it? I mean, that's the business model that's being created with the interlocal corporation. So without the interlocal corporation, but an effort to just simply fund the system, construction of the system, would you think that that dynamic would change for Otelco or someone like them?
We asked them, Kristen, we said, we're gonna build, again, theoretically, we're building open access. Would you be interested in participating as an ISP? They said they would come back to us. We asked them the other question. They said, well, you're building in these major, as John's point, in these dense areas, would you build open access? And they said, absolutely not.
Well, that might be them, but I'm seeing, other ISPs being willing to do that in small peninsula communities without issue, as long as the system is built. So for instance, I represent Arousik, and they've built their own, or are building their own network, half with grant funding and half with federal subsidized loan. And, they had 2 or 3 bidders willing to operate that system for them. So what the corporation is purporting to offer would seem to be some economy of scale in building out the system, right? And some potential benefit to the operators and having more populous communities being involved. But if those populous communities there's no intent to convert service that's, being done by some other ISP at the moment to this MIDC network, right? Like those people are likely to stay wherever they are.
Kristen, I would delineate between operator and internet service provider for the sake of this conversation, only because it gets confusing. So I would, again, in terms of internet service providers, part from the get-go, I joined this project. We wanted to make sure that we had partners who were interested in providing service. Those partners include GWI and Pioneer at this point as working partners. In terms of consulting partner, we have Axiom Technologies, which is working, as John and the board knows, working with us as both a consultant and in terms of designing the planning and engineering for this proposed network.
Okay. It's Axiom that we've been working with in Aroustic.
I mean, it was essential, Kristen, that, again, that we're not building or designing or thinking of this in a vacuum. So we've taken advice from Connect Maine, and certainly from EC Fiber out in Vermont, working with Wired West in Massachusetts, working with entities in Tennessee, in Kentucky, and Colorado, because there are so many landmines in this particular venture. And to Jeff's point, we're in some funky hybrid, whether we are a business, if this is a startup. I come from Silicon Valley. So is this a startup, or as we're often called, are we a quasi-utility, more in line with something like the sanitary landfills and all those kind of things? What are we? And so we're trying to figure out where we fit in terms of that lexicon as well.
Have you all received definitive advice about whether the interlocal corporation would have the authority to receive bonds that aren't just revenue bonds?
Private investment?
No, general obligation bonds.
We're going through that right now. We are looking at really non-recourse revenue bonds. Sorry, guys, I'm going into the other concept. We're looking at originally it was as the second tranche, because we needed to have revenue. We needed to show revenue to the bond underwriters. So there was no way that we were going to be able to qualify for any kind of non-recourse revenue bond in our first tranche of funding. So initially we had, as the board knows, we were keen. I mean, the reason why we moved it so fast is the ARP funding really was just ideal for the seed money. And to John's point, there are certainly some landmines in the original language for the Treasury Department in terms of what would be covered and what would not be covered. But nationally, a number of these organizations, we had 32 on a call with the White House about a month and a half ago, maybe more than a month and a half ago, but a month and a half ago, lobbying to change the interim guidelines. And those were reflected in the FAQ. To Jeff's point, at this point, in terms of how you could build with that ARP money, the language now states that you just need one unserved or underserved. And it allows us to build projects nationally and statewide that would be what I call pathway projects to those unserved or underserved. It serves Jeff, it serves this idea of a business model. To just build satellite to 6 houses, you have no revenue, you have no business model. So you need to find some manner or some mechanism to make sure that you have revenue, which would be, to John's point, the density, but at the same time that you have the intent and goals to absolutely serve the unserved and the underserved. In terms of our philosophy and our goals, that is right up there.
Okay, I'd like to, I think that helps give us all a little bit of context, but I just want to make sure you got your question answered directly there. There is no authority currently to issue general obligation bonds.
And can I just address to one? We have no, Kirsten, we have no taxing authority. And in
That's
the interim
different.
bylaws, because, so interim bylaws, just to put that front and center, section 9.1, where it states absolutely that we have no authority to tax or levy any of the participating municipalities. It is not in our mandate, it is not in our goals, it's not in our business plan. The financial commitment that you would be referring to would be for that feasibility study or that planning study. That is the end of it in terms of the design of the interlocal agreement, and as we have adjusted those interim bylaws. So again, 9.1, Kristen, in the bylaws was in response to Thomaston asking for that to be specific in the interim bylaws in writing.
Well, so I'm not concerned about the corporation going out and getting general obligation bonds and the costs somehow flowing to these communities. I'm concerned about the feasibility of being able to construct a system on the premise of revenue bonds, where the system will be so incredibly pre-revenue at the time, you know, that the bonds would be sought. So I would actually want to see broader authority to go out and obtain financing. And that does not mean that the interlocal corporation is assessing these communities. It would have been relatively easy to include in this interlocal agreement a provision that the corporation can go out and get bonds on behalf of the member communities. And here is the way in which the debt service will be paid into. And that's not a tax assessment. That is something that the communities are agreeing to take on by contract as an expense. And then they would have to assess accordingly in their own communities to fund it. So the next question then is whether you've received definitive advice from bond counsel that revenue bonds will be sufficient to do everything this corporation needs to do to get off the ground and fund construction.
And I would back up from that and say that revenue bonds are not everything that this corporation needs to do in any manner, shape, or form in terms of getting off the ground. And that was, I mean, having spoken with premier underwriters and premier banking institutions throughout the state, that's not an option, I mean, at this point. So we have had to find, we are, again, trying to find hybrid financing models with the assumption that, again, a revenue bond is not going to be in the first tranche. It would be fantastic to have that, but that is not a reality at this particular junction. We are looking at other models under consultation of bond writers later, but certainly in terms of financial institutions, of how to, again, this initial seed money plus what we call a line of commitment and how that is going to be constructed. And the first, Machias, Bangor Savings, again, talking to these institutions about designing that, Walter, as I said earlier, because we don't fit an easy model. We're not a startup necessarily, and we're not a full-fledged utility. And Kristen, to the point, what really is, in terms of those who are risk averse, we are not putting the towns on the line. We are not putting the faith and credit of the towns on the line. I refuse to do that. I thought that was a non-starter, John.
Well,
So,
I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think if this is a municipal corporation that's created by municipalities, then we are appointing directors. I'm not sure that we're shielded from liability. I wouldn't. Oh, that's great. I think
again, and then I would, that's again, so I would,
right, but
yeah,
that's
and I would love to, again, Kristen's opinion on that.
Yeah.
We are doing our
yeah. I
best.
mean, do you want to comment on that, Christian? Because I mean, I personally don't believe, given the nature of this corporation, that the municipalities would be 100% shielded in the event of a bankruptcy or something. We certainly would have to at least defend ourselves.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I'd have to look into maybe a little bit further. I don't think that you stand in any different position than members of an LLC, for instance, in this situation, that the liabilities of the corporation aren't going to flow through to you. But if the corporation does something that is against the fiduciary interests of the taxpayers, and they, as essentially pass-through shareholders of this corporation, wanted to sue the board of directors, I think they could probably do that.
And I would invite certainly to talk to Bernstein. Again, I'm not the legal, so if
Right,
it's okay, I would love to step away from that particular.
I didn't want to get, we don't have a lot of time left, and I didn't want to get hung up in that detail, but that seems to be an opinion I've heard from several people. We're absolutely 100% shielded from that, and I don't buy that on its face. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I don't buy it just because I've heard it from a few people.
And Kristen and John, please, let's do this. I'm gonna invite you to talk to Deborah Hall and Denise Munger, both lawyers on the board, and outside counsel, which includes Bernstein Sure. That would be a really wonderful thing to do. And then Bill Kelly from Camden has been terrific. I think in terms of that, that would be a really nice approach to just get to, discuss that particular aspect.
You know Bill Kelly, right, Kristen?
I do.
Everybody knows everybody, Kristen.
They used to be a lot better.
So maybe you guys need to talk about that one.
So we only got a few minutes left here, so I would like to jump back to the bylaws. I don't know if any of the other board members have specific comments. I have one in particular that I would like to see us pass forward, and it kind of goes to the question of what type of animal this is. I would like to see this corporation subject itself through the bylaws. Actually, I would have preferred it to be in the interlocal agreement, but again, that was sort of done before that was shaped, which is one of the things that still bothers me about this, is that was shaped and created. It seems like it was a fait accompli before we got involved, and that, but we're not going to change that. But I would like to see this corporation subject to the main freedom of access, information access, right? As any municipality is, or sanitary district is. I think the meeting should be open to the public. I can't say anything simpler, that I would like to simply see that imposed, included in the bylaws. So obviously I've heard that from someone else.
So we include that, sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but that is in, I want to say section 6A, where it's about meetings and it says public meetings, so meetings, and then, but again, John, happy.
That wasn't in my copy, I don't think.
So it should say something about quarterly meetings are open to the public.
Oh, yeah, but I'm talking more than that. I'm talking about the whole entire corporation and its activities be subject to the.
And I believe, and again, I'm not gonna get, I can't get into the legal, but I know as we reviewed the bylaws and doing it, there was a indication that that is part of the nonprofit state statute, that's built in.
I don't think that's.
So again, I'm not legal, but I'm happy, let's bring that forward as well, because that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that statute, correct me if I'm wrong, Christian, that statute does not apply to nonprofits. It applies to government and quasi municipals and the state. Which is
Well, each type of entity has its own provision about meetings being open, but I think because an interlocal corporation is not something that's very clearly 100% called out in the Freedom of Access Act as being subject to it, I would say that the bylaws should contain some reference to that. Plus, it's just a good reminder to everyone.
Yeah, and then, but again, I'm not just talking about meetings, I'm talking about access to documents. I'd also like to see the bylaws call for an annual audit, which I did in there, of the corporation. That is, and again, that would be a public document if my first comment was. And I have one other comment and it escapes me.
And John, can I ask if they bring those forward to us?
Well, yeah, that's what this purpose is my understanding is we're supposed to comment by the 23rd. Thank you.
I only bring it up because I've been to a number of towns and people we have these wonderful conversations yet, and then crickets. So please, we're doing our best to.
Yeah. So Kristen, do you have any specific comments on the bylaws? I know you're gonna start to run short of time here, but
yeah, no, I do. Just a few. Let me get back to them.
With us, and then I'll ask Jeff and Walter if they have any specifics as well after.
Yep. So actually, I think that the funding provision in here actually is a little bit broader in a sense than the interlocal agreement, and would seem to include other types of bonds to the extent this corporation is eligible, because it says
Where are we?
We're in Article 3, Section 3.3. Oh, actually, no, sorry, this is further on down. Okay, it's a 9.4.
Oh, way further than that.
Yeah, sorry. That section I just referred to, 3.3, actually does refer just to revenue bonds, but this 9.4 says any other form of funding for the corporation as permitted by law. So while this does purport, I think, to give the authority it would need to go out and get a revenue bond if the board of directors, a non-revenue bond if the directors agreed, I'm still not sure that would be allowed under the interlocal agreement itself.
So your comment is these two things appear or potentially are in conflict.
In conflict with each other, and I think that Section 9 provision that I just called out is the better way for all of this to have read, to give as broad of authority as possible, because you need as many funding sources as possible to get this thing working. But some attention would have to be paid as to whether the interlocal agreement would allow the type of broader bond authority that 9 point whatever might. The treasurer, I think, is going to have an important role here. And I would like to see that not to be not to have to be a political appointment, meaning
Where are we?
Officers are.
Got it, 6-8.
Okay. A lot of nonprofits have the ability to appoint the treasurer from outside the organization. And that might be something to consider, so that you have somebody who is actually qualified to serve as a treasurer dealing with this amount of money. Like I said, I definitely would like to see, although it would require an agreement amendment to that the board of directors would appoint the officers, and the officers serve as the executive committee only, without the 2 extra members from the forming towns.
That brings us back to the interlocal again, though.
It does, but it's a huge point for any community that's not Camden or Rockport. The director's term for 5 years, I worry might be a deterrent for some people who might have great skills and expertise and want to be able to serve, but feel like they can't make a 5-year commitment. So I would suggest a 2-year
Hold on,
term.
Kristen.
Yep.
A second.
Yeah, she's going through things that we've changed. So that she's got.
Well, But you changed it after it was given to us for comment.
That's what we all got.
And what we do.
Huh? I don't know. I mean, we haven't received anything beyond this, right?
I haven't.
No, they were sent to. That's
No,
why I'm
okay.
trying to figure out what's going on here.
I didn't get anything. There's a confusion about which version we have.
I hear that. What has been changed though, Matt, from what I've just pointed out?
Because we sent out a revised, what we call the interim bylaws.
No, we never got that.
No,
I looked for that because I was surprised you didn't send those out when they
We
were.
sent them, and again, this is that email I sent as well. I mean, so it went to the MIC, so the representative would have been clipped. And hi, guys.
Lynn.
And
Well, Lynn's on our technology committee.
so that's why I'm yes, so some of this, I'm just shaking my head going, whoa, we. Kristen.
I did not forward anything on. I don't think I received, sorry, I'm still somewhat new here, so I know I didn't forward anything.
No, see it. Go ahead, Ian. Say what you were going to say. We couldn't hear you.
That was Lynn.
That was right.
Lynn?
Yes. I said I didn't,
Go ahead.
I was saying I don't think I received anything, and I definitely didn't forward anything on. So if, I'm not sure what the communication channel is
Okay.
for that.
Seems like we need to get a copy of the interim bylaws that were adopted from somebody. Hopefully we can cobble together based on what we've heard today, comments.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation is still coaching, and your questions are absolutely spot on, and the things that you recommend are terrific. But we need to get you those.
Yeah.
So are you saying, Matt, that, for instance, the point I made about the treasurer has been addressed, or the point about?
I'll have to look at that, but certainly things when you mentioned 5 years, that was changed to 3 years. I mean, a lot of the things that you've gone over, we adjusted based on comments so far.
Okay.
So we're trying to be
Well-
as amenable as possible.
I think that's why we've got the previous version, because that, what you guys approved internally was an internal document that did not go out to town.
Went out to the coalition.
Went out to yourselves, right?
Yeah. Can we get Terry on the list, because she's sort of the, what's the word?
The blue.
I don't know who maintains the list, but but that would be helpful, because, and not only that, Terry's organized.
Well, and John, it just, you know, as a sidebar, that's part of the reason I'm here. is
Yeah,
to-
and that's
Hi,
great.
guys, let's, you know, we're trying to do a good thing. Let's see if we can make it work.
And all of this was rushed for us. I mean, you know, that I was shocked when you, I'll be quite honest, that didn't build my confidence when I got this email from Deborah said, here's the proposed bylaws. We need comments in 4 days, after we had been asking for copies of the bylaws for weeks, and we're told that we're none, and then all of a sudden we get a copy that's labeled version 4, not 1. And said, please comment in 4 days. And I was like, what is going on with this group?
Well, because we're being recorded, I won't mention anything about the 4 days, except that we quickly went to 30 days.
I
Thank you.
saw that.
Thank you.
Only-
We're being recorded, so I won't just go, we quickly went to 30 days. And then, Walter, we definitely need to get you.
Okay, we,
But I think it's still important for us to provide the response on the document that we have in front of us, because at some point you're gonna review those and either incorporate them or not incorporate them. Yeah, then that's just it.
so at this point, you only have 2 members, correct?
We have, as of this week, we have 3 members. Thomaston has joined, and as of next week, Rockland will be fine.
Thompson has joined. They
And
already
they have
have.
not signed it. They approved it now at the last select board meeting after the same kind of discussion.
Yeah.
With legal, again, just so you guys know, you are spot on in the way you're going about this. Do not rush. Everybody needs to be on board and believe what's going on.
Okay, so,
It doesn't work.
so 2 towns approved the interim bylaws, or 3 towns, I assume?
Again, let's go back to the interlocal agreement.
No,
We do that one?
no, the interlocal agreement, I realized, was just approved initially by Camden and Rockville, but you said you
Well, no,
approved.
that's, so interlocal, so let's go back, the warrant article to, sorry, I'll throw it off to you.
Okay.
One more time.
My understanding is that Camden and Rockport both approved the interlocal agreement and the corporation was formed.
Correct.
Thomaston town meeting gave Thomaston selectmen the authority. Did our town meeting. And as far as I know, all that's happened. My understanding is Rockland has not taken any formal votes, city council.
Yeah, to that, so Thomaston is now approved joining the development corporation.
So the board of selectmen is actually joined, for lack of a better word, joined, but the corporation now has 3. Okay. And so the interim bylaws that we don't have were approved before Thomaston joined. So they were approved by Camden and Rockport. So 2 bylaws will be approved by 3 towns. Rockland hasn't voted. I'm just trying to keep things as they are, not as they may be.
Yeah.
Okay. I agree with Jeff. I think we should just comment based on what we have. And then if it's obviously moot point, it's a moot point.
But
Does
so
that make
far, your
sense?
questions and comments have been excellent and spot on with what we've been hearing around the region.
Kristen, do you have any other comments?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say real quick that I did talk to Thomaston's attorney. And they have all the same concerns that you do, that I do, but have decided, despite of those concerns, I guess, to join.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Article 12, this is really more of a just pointing out what's not in this than what's in it, but you know, this prohibits against sharing in corporate earnings by any directors or officers. But you know, again, my question remains about and this goes back to the interlocal agreement as well, there's just no clear mechanism for what you put in and what you get out. And one of my biggest criticisms about that interlocal agreement was that there are these concepts of withdrawal and termination, which in my mind are the same. And it just was very confusing the way the interlocal agreement is worded. It made it seem like withdrawal of one community prompts a termination of the corporation. But then it also has provisions for what the community gets if they withdraw. And that to me was just kind of a mess in the agreement, frankly, and needs to be figured out. But further to that, you know, if this all works, this will be likely a revenue generating entity. And there's just no protocol in here for how that gets distributed. And there's also no protocol in here, not that this is necessarily the right or the only document to have that, but there's just nothing has been, you know, preordained about how that all is going to work. And that's a little bit scary for anyone joining in, I think. And I think that's all I have on the bylaws. Really, you know, my concerns all derive back from the interlocal agreement. And I would like to see changes to that. And I think that Thomaston would probably like to see those same changes, and Cushing would like to see those same changes. So I hope, Matt, that that's something that we can talk about in greater detail before, you know, either of my two towns, South Thomaston or Cushing, join.
Can you write those up for us just briefly, and I'll write up the comments that I made, and we can get those together. Because I think we're looking at the 23rd for the deadline, and I don't want to wait until we get the new ones. And I believe Mid-Coast Internet Coalition already has your comments on the interlocal agreement. They were given the cliff to pass.
I think Deborah has mentioned that she got.
I think so too. I think you have them. I think you have. If you don't, I can make, before you leave, Terry.
You said they're due on the 23rd?
Pardon?
You said they're due on the 23rd?
Yes, that's my understanding. It was extended to the 23rd.
Let's if we can, let's do a executive session sometime between now and then and put our heads together and just finalize what our list of concerns is on both documents.
5 o'clock on the 20th.
You do 5 o'clock on the 20th?
Let me check real quick.
That'll only give us an hour.
Was this
That evening, I'm just not entirely sure when it starts.
Open the meeting and then go into executive session.
but will Kristen be on Zoom?
Oh, will you be on Zoom?
Depends where I have to be. Let me see. No, I'm okay. 5 o'clock I could do either way.
You do it. I prefer to come down and actually sit with us. I mean, but if we're gonna.
Can you join us in person, Kristen?
I can, if you don't mind the travel time.
I'm not traveling.
No.
I know what you meant.
You know what she's saying.
Okay, well, I guess we'll do that then. I'm looking at the clock because I know you got a mediation session starting at 9, so. So why
Let's
don't
plan
we-
on doing that. And I'll come prepared with my list. You all come prepared with your list, and we'll put our heads together and come up with the final list and be able to get it to them in time.
Okay, good. So, I guess anybody else, anything they want to offer on this before Kristen signs off? Matt, any closing comments?
Just the one about the executive committee, which there are 2 standing members, which are Camden and Rockland.
Right.
But there's representatives, there's some misunderstanding there from each.
Not
I mean,
on
I'm sorry, not
executive
on the
committee?
board, there's one representative. But the only benefit of the charter members is that they are guaranteed 1 seat.
And let's face it, in my experience, the executive committee ends up being the. Right. I don't know how to say this politely, but.
The executive committee ends up being what, John?
I'm not sure what I have a good choice of words, but and I don't want to be, I think they end up being powerful, executive committees in these type of corporations.
Absolutely. That's my concern too. That's why I say that that's not That's not the right place to give them whatever benefit that they're due for having started this.
That was my
Nor do I-
major
I
concern the first time I read the agreement. So anyway,
From
go ahead.
from a financial or ethical standpoint, I don't see where they need a benefit, frankly. Just because it was their idea and they've done the hard work to pull it together, and that's great and everyone's appreciative, but does that mean they have to be driving the bus going forward? I don't think it does.
Well, and it's forever too. It's not like 2 years or something.
Exactly. I mean, it feels better maybe to do that in the first couple of years, but going forward, that's tricky. I mean, in reality, all of these members have equal control.
Hold on. We got 2 people talking. Finish, Kristen, and then hang on. Go ahead.
In
Tricia.
reality, all of these members have equal control, and if South Thomaston, Cushing, and Thomaston join, that's the voting power to change these agreements in the future. But there's the risk of a huge rift if that happens down the line. I'd rather see it get taken care of now.
Go ahead, Matt.
Again, but Kristen, the one town, one vote. Is that, so that's a concern or not a concern? As opposed to.
I'm saying that these 3 communities outweigh the 2 founding communities in terms of being able to force a change to the interlocal agreement down the line. But I worry that if that becomes an issue for whatever reason, then the whole thing is going to go up in smoke, which is scary.
Yeah, and actually, I questioned whether the one town, one vote would hold up if someone challenged it. That would be,
As long as
it's a benefit to South Thomas at this point, but anyway.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, as long as it's in the agreement and the voters have approved the agreement, it's completely fine. But will that politically become an issue down the line? It might.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'll see you on the 20th.
Yeah. Have fun in mediation.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see you at 5 on the 20th.
Perfect.
And hold on, Walter?
I don't need Kristen.
Okay, good. See you, Kristen.
Thank you, guys.
Hi, Kristen. Jan, we assigned or appointed Jan to as a select board rep during this process. An official role, or do we need to?
It would be beneficial just for these type of things. So most of the things, and again, this is the coalition, where the information is disseminated, have a select board representative to avoid what we just had, but oops, those are the wrong version of, because it would be beneficial if there was a representative. I was just thinking of that.
Oh, it doesn't sound like we had the wrong version. We just don't have the latest version that you approved. The version that we got was the right version at the time. Does someone want to serve as my hearing? I get, not me.
Oh, come on, John, we're a fighting group. Come on.
Do you want to? I might as well.
You want to make a motion?
I would make a motion that we appoint Walter as the.
Okay. I'll second that. All those in favor? And maybe you can get on the list.
This is aside, yes. Let's get you on the list.
Yeah, and Terry. Not that you're not organized, Walter.
But there may have been, yeah, let's just move forward in a positive way.
So who's left on Zoom
Lynn's on.
Curtis has joined.
already? He's a long way off. Is Lynn,
And Justin Lynn Caravan.
okay, Lynn,
Caravan, sorry.
still there?
Yes.
So Ann and Lynn, you're welcome to stay and listen, but we're gonna move on to some other items.
Okay, thanks for hosting. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to sign off. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay.
And thanks, Matt, for coming down for this. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Nice to see you all. It's so refreshing to see that you actually have 20 hours a day. And I apologize because I walk the dog. I brought grass in. You guys have a.
Oh, as long as it was grass.
That's what I'm saying, John, just grass.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Have a great day.
So, is there a way to let her know that we're gonna be a while before we get to him?
If he's listening.
If he's
he's
listening,
not
oh, we can hear that, okay.
ask
I
him.
I come back later.
Well, you're welcome. Listen, I just wanted to let you know, we're just moving on to item 2, so.
Okay, I'll come back in half an hour,
Okay, great.
something like that.
Okay.
Okay.
Next item is discussion with John Hanson regarding fire marshal permit for temporary relocation of the library to Guilford Butler School. So, think is, before John has, or I've relayed to you, John has indicated to me that he'd be willing to sort of facilitate the, at least the initial contact with the fire marshal's office to discuss a change of use permit to temporarily relocate the library to the Guilford Butler School. And Jeff has agreed to serve as to work with John on that. So I relayed that back to John, and we just wanted to make sure it would be worthwhile to me to make sure we're all on the same page about exactly what we're looking for and asking for. So, John, do you want to offer anything to start at this point, or?
Well, I think the process of obtaining some kind of a letter or permit from the state fire marshal's office to use the former school was one of those things that I had indicated in one of my reports that I had spoken at a meeting at the fire marshal's office years ago or more. And they had indicated that they typically look at existing buildings that are going through a change of occupancy or a change of use. And they will bend some of the rules on a case-by-case basis. So my hope was to be able to go over and sit down as I did years ago. But ever since COVID hit, the fire marshal's office is basically Zoom only. And you cannot sit down and talk to somebody face to face. So I think the other issue is that they are severely understaffed. In a department that typically had 3 or 4 people, they're down to only 2 people right now, and one of those is transferring out, so they really only have 1 person there that is working on much of anything. So the way to move ahead is to submit an application via the internet for the building with, I can include the drawings that show the existing conditions we have. And basically the statement that we want to change the use to the library. Now, I think that will get us in line and allow us the opportunity to start with them asking us some questions that I'm sure they will have. And it may be that we will have 1 or more Zoom meetings with them, because we have to take into consideration if any partitions are going to be changed, moved, demolished. Any work that's done has to be approved by the fire marshal's office.
So when you say get in line, that my understanding is, I've heard it from Gabe as well as you, we could be talking weeks.
And it could be months, yeah,
Even get a
before
meeting.
you'll get any kind of a response. That's the way it is there.
Just, I want to follow that up a little bit. Gabe had indicated at our, and I don't know his
Thomasula.
at our last meeting that he thought it might be possible for the code officer to give us some sort of pre-temporary use permit of why we were negotiating with the fire marshal's
office, which sounded, I thought that's what I heard him say, something to that effect.
Well, the fire marshal's office is what has jurisdiction. We have to get it from them. Under MUBAC, which covers all construction, all buildings in the state of Maine. MUBAC is the Maine Uniform Building and Energy
Yeah.
Code. Any town with a population less than 4,000 has no enforcement. Excuse me. So we're, the town of South Thomas code officer basically enforce it.
Okay,
But MUBAC is separate from the fire marshal.
okay. Well, we can talk to him a little bit about that, but that didn't sound right to me.
No, I don't, personally, I don't see any ways that the local code officer can do anything to allow anything to happen in there. It's the fire marshal's office has the jurisdiction.
We can follow that. So I guess, am I correct in assuming that when we filed this permit, or application, whatever you want to call it, permit application, would you reference your earlier discussion regarding the temporary nature of this that you had with?
I had a document that was like 6 pages that talked about new construction and renovation and temporary use. I would include all of the documentation that has been distributed previously over the last.
But I was talking about, would you reference your previous conversation with the gentleman, the fire marshal?
Well, that's in the report.
It is,
So
okay, so you would.
it
Okay.
would, yes.
So, thoughts? Yeah, I think since we discussed it last time, there's been, I think, 2 things that have come up on it that shifted slightly. One is, in the original discussion you had, they were gonna ask us to do 2 ADA compliant bathrooms.
Well, not necessarily 2.
Okay.
Okay, the idea is, here's the building. The regulations say we're supposed to do a certain amount of things. What will you let us get away with to use the building? So it's not a given that it necessarily has to be both toilets. So right now, all the possibilities are open.
And so I guess more from a tactical perspective, would it be better for us to just go in with, this is what we'd like to do? And again, I'm thinking of the downstairs. I would be interested in knowing what it would take to use the downstairs. But if that's going to delay or complicate getting a temporary use permit for the upstairs, I don't even want to go there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And as I have indicated previously, the major issue is the egress from the lower level, because there are 3 means of egress. One is the main stair, which does the next 2 levels. When you get to the top of that stair, the last riser, from there to the door, by code, is supposed to be a full landing, which would be between 3 and 3.5 feet. If you go look at it, you'll see that there's only about half that. So there are code complications, and the rise and the run of the stair is really not up to what it should be, although there are exceptions for existing buildings. So there's also enclosure of the bottom of the stair. Typically in a 2-story building, when that stair is used as a means of egress, it needs to be closed off both at the top and at the bottom, and grab it in a fire situation from going up through the stair. And so that stair is a major issue as far as I'm concerned. We have one other door out of the lower level that goes out back. And then at the southerly end of the building, there's what we call the doghouse on the outside of the building that has the stairs going up. But it only has a little over 5 feet of headroom, which makes it non-compliant. So my feeling is they'd be willing to work with us on the upper level because it has three means of egress that are reasonably compliant, but we have major issues with the egress in the lower level. So when I had that discussion with the fire marshal's office several years ago, their suggestion, even at that time, was basically to lock off the lower level and not occupy it. Now, that doesn't mean nobody could go in there, but it would be strictly somebody needs to check on the boiler, or if the downstairs area, they happen to have a few things stored down there. That's that kind of use, but no assembly of people, no meetings, nothing, no activities there.
I'd like to differentiate here about what you're talking about. I don't object to asking the question if it's not gonna, as you put it, throw things off, but I do not support that being in our request. Being voted on.
And I don't either, especially, I'm just interested in the answer. What would it take for us to utilize that with people?
Yeah. And I'm fine with that in case down the road we have to go that route if we have to.
But in this permit application we're making, we need to tell them what it is we want from them. And what we want is access to the ground, the main level.
Yes.
But I also think we got to remember it's not just a library. What town meeting voted on was, using one or more of the classrooms for community space as well. My impression is we weren't going in, we were trying to do this on a temporary, at least inexpensive basis as possible, and we weren't talking about moving petitions or anything like that at this point. And that, I think we're all on the same page. But
Well, I think that's the cleanest way to do it, and it's the easiest way to get use the building.
I know Penny would like to include in our request using the downstairs. She stated that at the last meeting. Do you want to reiterate your comments again?
Well, the exercise classes are something that I thought we could utilize the lower level for, and with correcting the egress and the stairwell, by fundraising or whatever, and the exercise class has a earning potential of $2,500 to $3,000 a year by donation, so we give the class for free. And the surface down there is the safest surface in town that we could be on. We're back on carpet, that's problematic, but at least it's indoors. We're on the tar in the heat and rain, and so I thought if we're going to go, let's see what it would take. If it is fixing those two things and that's it, then maybe we find out how much that might cost us. I don't see this article. I don't think people would have not voted for it if it included using the local level.
I wouldn't assume that. I don't think I would have, to be honest with you. Anyway, well, I just think that's a big assumption.
And I am not averse to future point going with a separate permit. But my thought process is we get the permit to use the main floor and make that happen as soon and then find out how much it's going to cost. Once we've done that, then we can say, okay, now if we want to use the downstairs, here's our, and correct me if I'm wrong, we want to go in with, this is our proposal, will you accept that? Opposed to, here's what we want to change the use to and what will you require?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. I mean, we're gonna say what we want to do, and we don't plan to do anything. Then they're gonna come back and tell us, well, if that's what you're going to do, you need to take care of this.
Can we tell them up front, we want to take care of this per your previous discussion with them? That we would like to convert one of the bathrooms to ADA, put in a.
We can suggest that, yes.
All right.
And again, whether they would be willing to buy that,
But let me clarify that everything that they're going to say that the code says we're supposed to do, that they will give us time. In other words, they'll allow us to move in, but the understanding is we either abandon the building after 3, 4, or 5 years, or at the end of that 3, 4, or 5 years, we've got to go back in and do everything that the code requires.
Okay.
But what they are effectively doing is if they see a way to make the building safe enough for temporary use, the understanding that we are going to either abandon the building or fully upgrade it at the end of a time period. So that they will give us a letter, and we will have to sign this letter that basically says, you know, we will either abandon the building or we will fix all these other things that are on their list. So they're going to do an extensive review, and they're going to come up with a whole list of things they want us to do. And then they're going to say, if you do this one and maybe this one, you can use the building. And again, it's one of those things that happens in a meeting. They have the right, and I've been through this before in the last 30 years, a couple of other buildings that have done the same thing. But they're all different, and you never know exactly how lenient they're going to be.
Do you think that they are under the same, wouldn't they be under the same requirements as like the town as far as Zoom meetings? Wouldn't they be required to go to in-face meeting at some point? And the rest of the state has to do it by the end of July. So August they have.
And that may very well be, but I know as of right now,
They're still
doing strictly Zoom. Yeah, and I think we'd like to do the law. I think we were talking 5 years as opposed to 3, because we assumed that it was going to take at least 5 years to kind of pull together. Yeah. And the question is, they may say we'll only give you 4. I know, but I think we should go in and ask it maybe even 6 and then come back to 5 or something. So, Andra, did you have, sorry?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask for clarification. You're saying at the end of, say, 5 years, either abandon the building or get it up. I'm assuming that means by the end of 5 years, you will either abandon the building or you will have already by that date got it up to. Not at that date, you get started.
Correct.
Which is why I think we should push for 6 or 5 or something, you know. It's gonna take a while to get organized, see how successful we are fundraising for a new building, and then it's gonna take a few years to determine whether or not we're gonna be able to do it. And if we're not gonna be able to do it in a few years, then we may need to revisit, have the town meeting revisit the question. One more question on the process. So you make the application, come back and they say, okay, here's the things you have to do. But if you're going to vacate it at such a date, you have to do these things. Will they say you can move in while you're doing those, or will they say you cannot move in at all until you?
If they come up with a minimum, we have to do those.
Okay, before we
occupy.
And so what you're saying is they may say you got a year to do this and this, or something like that. Pause.
Well, no,
You gotta do these 3
they're
things.
gonna say whatever the minimum is, you have to do before you
move in.
And once you occupy, you have this deadline out there that's out X number of years. And in theory, you need to plan so many years into it if you're gonna stay there to start doing those items. Now, if you got to the end of it and you're not 100% there, it's not the end of the world. You'll have to go back and try to get an extension. But you have to show good faith that you are moving ahead on.
Okay. We need that, yeah.
Ron,
Yeah. Go ahead.
at the last meeting, they did suggest that we go forward with the plans that, you know, if we wanted to use the lower level on an interim basis, that we put that in. He said, put it all in at this initial application.
He did, but I'm hearing different from
what John is, Jeff are talking about.
Yeah. My fear is what they'll say is now, before you can move in, you've got to fix the downstairs. And I don't.
Apply and to use the top floor, what do we need to get done? And then if we wanted to use the lower level, what do we need to get done?
Separate one, separate process.
A separate permit, but I mean, the
Yes.
backup there.
Yeah, I just think from a tactical point of view, I'm afraid that we will delay and complicate the move-in if we try to include the bottom floor.
That wasn't the impression I got from Dave.
No, maybe his impression, but I agree with Jeff, and I think John agrees.
Yeah, to me, it really complicates it. It just gets.
And all of that, the town didn't vote on that. And I just, for us to go and put that in as a request at this point, I feel is not what we have authorized to do at a town. But I, in some ways, I think the less attention we call to the downstairs, we're off we are. But for a number of reasons.
But going forward, John, what do you think our next steps are? Are you going to take care of this and coordinate with us?
Yeah,
or-
I'm gonna fill out the application. And I will include the drawings that I had done several years ago, along with the report. And obviously, my name and phone number will be on the application. And then it's just a matter of hearing from them. And if there's going to be a Zoom meeting set up, I would do it here. And you would all be invited.
Well, I think, we can talk about that, but then that becomes a select board meeting.
Well, it's just me.
Which is why I thought if it was just you and
That's what I'm
Penny,
talking about.
yeah.
And I think that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, you sort it out.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't want it to be a meeting.
Okay, but, okay. We got everything we need to move forward. How long do you anticipate this will take to get filed?
Between 1 and 2 weeks to put the application.
We're looking at a protracted period of time.
But we need to start.
Okay. Do we need a motion or anything, or are we good?
I think we're good.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
On another item, I do understand that I was nominated for a position on the Board of Appeals
Alternate.
as an alternate.
You were appointed.
I was appointed, but I haven't been sworn in yet.
Correct.
I want to let you know, I really don't want to serve on it.
If you change your mind.
Yes and no. I changed my mind, but you remembered that I had at one time said that I might be willing or that I would be willing. And after that, I told a few other people that I really didn't want to. And so there was a little misinformation there. And as I'm in the process of retiring or attempting to retire, dealing with the Board of Appeals is just something it's not.
Well, are you submitting your resignation?
I'm submitting my resignation.
Terry, would you note that?
Has Rich Norman reached out to you?
Okay.
Yeah, was on there for quite a while.
And he indicated to me that contact.
All right, good to go. Is Curtis back?
Yes.
I'm here.
How you doing?
Good. How you doing, Dawn?
Well, long morning so far. Thank your company for letting you zoom in.
Okay. Keep me pretty busy.
Yeah. Just wanted to have a chat with you about I'm just making a note, sorry, about planning board administration, couple of different things. I think items in relation to the revised establishing ordinance that was passed at town meeting and the bylaws, and a couple of concerns about the bylaws, and also a little discussion about notice, and maybe also notice to abutters or interested parties when permit applications are filed, and also public hearings. I guess I'll start. I would be interested, and I don't know if these things belong in the ordinance or in the bylaws. Obviously, ordinance would require going back to town meeting. But I would like to see the town codify in one or either one of those. I think preferably the bylaws at this point in time, since the ordinance would be going back to a town meeting. You know, when a permit application comes in, does it rise to the level of requiring some sort of notice to abutters, however that is defined? So I guess in my mind, I'm thinking of, you know, what would trigger it. Certainly if someone applies to the code officer for a 10-by-10 deck, I'm not talking about that, but what level of project would trigger it, how we would define that, what the notification would be that that application has been filed, who it would go to, how long in advance it would have to go to, those types of things. And then also, I'm interested in, the bylaws currently say that the planning board may hold a public hearing, but there's really no standard about when they should. And it just seems as though that's a little objective to me, that they may hold one.
Right.
If people hear about it and they come in and complain, does that trigger it? To me, that shouldn't be the trigger. What, you know, should be a more objective standard. And then there's a few other things in the bylaws that we could down after, but I think that's the bulk of what I wanted to talk about, and I think we wanted to talk about, but I don't want to speak for Jeff and Walter. So
Yeah, I agree. The two issues I've got is consistency on hearings versus public hearings. And there is kind of a nuanced difference between them. Every time the planning board meets with a permittee, that is a hearing, and it's a quasi judicial function that the planning board performs. But that is not, and this town has typically not done public hearings as defined by statute.
and you're talking about the planning.
The planning board is doing that. So by putting it in the bylaws that you may do public hearings, you open up a can of worms. And the same is true with the notice. Because it now, if you're going to do it for one thing and you're not going to do it for all things, then you have to be very clear on where that trigger is, because it immediately opens you up to potential lawsuits or challenges on every single permit that you issue. It has to be very, very clear. And so those are my two issues: how we do the notices and whether we do public hearings or just hearings, and getting the words correctly. Always doing it the same way. Yeah. Traditionally never sent out notices. That was by design, because once you send it out for one thing, you now have to do it for all things.
That came up in the when I wrote the bylaws, where I had a lot of things in it for writing notices and notifying people and the hearings. And during the process of, you know, with the planning board, a lot of those things got eliminated for those very reasons. So that they were in there initially, and then you know, who's going to write the letters, who's going to notify the people. It's not in the ordinance, so it was left out.
Yeah.
Why it's left out.
And I don't want to get into overkill here either. I mean, I just.
My thinking is, what we've done since we've had the bylaws, we've had two more applications, and I did write letters to the abutters, because I think Walter heard, you know, inquired with him, one of the neighbors, so we notified the neighbors there. And then also on the solar farm, we notified the abutters there, because it's kind of a bigger project. So that's what triggered those.
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't notify in some cases. I just think that we need to clearly define when it is. The other thing is who sends it. Most towns require the permittee to notify the abutters. And part of the permit says, I have notified all the abutters. Abutters are pretty well defined in the ordinance, so that's really not the issue. The issue is when you do it and who does it.
Well, that would require changing the old performance standards form to include that.
Right.
And it's not in there right now, but the last two, we did notify the abutters. I wrote the letters for the people, so I know they got done. And then the people came in or they didn't come in, but it'd probably be a better practice to notify people in writing for these projects. And then that would, save that, upsetting them, I guess. But so we've never done it. We didn't do it on the Benner project, Benner, the Wilson, Kaznaki. There was a couple of redemption centers that were put in, the beer tasting. There's probably several others that no notifications were given to the abutters. It hasn't been the practice of the planning board to notify abutters when allowed use is in a district, so.
Yeah, and again, I'm not suggesting that it should be for every project. I think we should have some definition of what triggers that. I don't know what that is at this point, but.
If you want to use the amount of money of a project,
Well, it could be the amount of money, it could be the square footage. I think there could be a couple of different things.
Okay.
And I personally have never been a fan of the process that Jeff described where the applicant notifies it, because my experience has been the applicant's vision of the project when notifying abutters tends to be scaled down.
If you had a standard letter or something that you could give them to mail out, maybe that might.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but I think the first step is to codify in the bylaws or the ordinance, but I would prefer at this time the bylaws, what those are. And I agree with Jeff. I think you could just simply say we'll notify the abutters and then say, see ordinance for definition of a butter. I mean, something like that. So.
Well, we've been notified the abutters, and actually we notified some people who lived in the neighborhood.
Yeah, but you gotta, but that brings in another thing. I mean, personally, if it says a butter, I would notify a butters, because once you start notifying someone who's not in a butter,
correct,
there's an expectation that they're gonna.
Well, Annette Nagel mentioned that to it in an email, I think somewhere that about that as well, that they were the only abutters, say, for the Rockwell project. But yeah, I understand.
Although abutters sometimes, I think in the ordinance define people across the street, which technically is not in a butter.
Right.
In our definition, it is. Right, but it isn't physical.
We did it out of a courtesy.
Directly across the street.
Right. But,
we did that out of a courtesy to the person that lived across the street. Well, there was actually two, and on that project, I think we did two over there.
One is a corner of butter.
Yeah.
But anyways, okay, so we just we wanted to talk about that with you. I think I actually had a couple of samples I pulled down from someplace. I don't have them with me. I could send those to you, or
sure,
take a stab at drafting something, or perhaps Jeff could. You have a lot of knowledge on this, but we can move forward,
and then they let them review it as well, and then vote on it to either include it or not include it or modify it, because everybody, I have to kind of go along with what the rest of the board wants to do. You know what I mean? On that, I have to listen to their wishes, to put it that way.
Yeah.
Well.
And then did you have anything to add on that?
I have a question to follow up on it. It appears in these bylaws, and that is the term hearing is used in places that I think it shouldn't be used, because there's a definition of hearing in which there's it's governed by statute, right? Public hearing, and so when you have an information, and that's why we distinguished a couple of things in the last year. This is an information session, not a hearing, because there's an expectation of what results from the hearing. I think that in all of our boards and all of our documentation, perhaps public hearings should be capitalized or italicized, that it's being used in accordance with the statute. And if you want to call have a meeting that you used to call a hearing, call it what it is. I'm just raising that because every time I see the word now, I think, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I agree with you.
What are you proposing for the bylaws? Are you proposing to remove public hearing and just change it to hearing?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not even sure hearing is the right.
Hearing is the appropriate word for planning board because they are actually hearing the permittee and anybody who wants to come in. So they have to weigh both sides. They are. So they're
individual hearing. We do, of course, we have a public comment session just like all the other town meetings do. So we do have that every meeting. People can come in. The only public hearings that I knew that they had in the past was on the gravel pit, and
actually we didn't have. Matter of fact, that was the issue that our legal provided to us, was that our ordinance does not require us to have a public hearing for the hearing of permits. So we didn't technically have a public hearing. It is run very similar to one, but it is not technically a public hearing. It is a hearing of the permit application.
Okay. When I
nuanced difference, but it's an important difference.
When I wrote this, what I did was I looked at, of course, several other towns to see what kind of things they had in theirs, and then that's how I got the public hearing. That was from an actual town in Maine. And
a lot of towns do that. Every one of the planning board meetings is a technical public hearing, and a very specific process for doing public hearings.
Well, they had a separate one, separate, just like we have ours written now. But if you want to change it to hearing, but
well, I'm not sure.
The board may say we need to do a hearing on this because it's a large impact or something, or a large area or something. So
and it goes the same thing that we were talking about for notice. If we are going to do something different, a public hearing versus a regular hearing, or even a hearing as opposed to reviewing the permit, then we need to clearly identify what the difference is, where it steps up, where it changes.
What triggers it, I guess, yeah. What would trigger it? The notifications, I was a proponent of notifying people. Okay, when we wrote the bylaws, and a lot of people, well, who's going to do it, and so it was left out. But I mean, either as far as posting the publicly, we kind of use the businesses around town and the post office and the town office to do our public postings, and on the of course on the internet too, the town website. But I don't know what the hard answer is to it. If you want to notify, like you say, either notify everybody or you got to have something that triggers it, that the notifications go out.
There's a cost to doing the mailings.
Right.
And so if you're doing it for everybody, then that cost quickly ratchets it up.
Right.
And I don't think we wanted to necessarily answer the questions tonight. We just wanted to kind of kick it around a little.
Yeah.
Did you have
I had
hang on one second. We got a comment from the public.
just thoughts on back on notice to abutters or whatever. I looked into what other jurisdictions in Knox County do, for example.
Yeah,
that would be useful. I'm thinking that maybe there should be a criteria for when you've got to notify, and if somebody's just putting in a garden shed well within their property lines and it's not going to be very big, versus they're going to be putting in a really big tall shed and it's going to be as close to the property line as it's allowed and it's going to block the neighbor's view. that, and I gathered there was no notice, or there's all this uproar about nobody knew about this wedding barn or something. Maybe that's not the
Well,
same kind of thing,
it
but
It
maybe
was,
that
it
was
was
not.
posted, yeah, but.
Okay,
that's-
but anyway, somehow uproar occurred. So that's one thought, is there could be guidelines on this. This merits notifying the abutters. This small potato, or adding a deck, whatever.
Was my original thought, is what triggers it.
What, yes.
Let me just explain to the lady that's speaking.
Wait a minute, let her finish her.
Oh, I didn't know, I'm sorry.
Oh, hearing versus public hearing versus. They may need to be defined terms, and each of them is going to have requirements for what is the process. When must it be used? And there's a lot of other terms you could use that avoid that, like listening session, information session, review session. Some, you could have different things that you're doing as the planning board. If you're at the hearing or public hearing, that's going to trigger the expectation for certain kinds of process, due process, record keeping, yada, yada, yada. You really ought to be mindful of when.
I think that's kind of what that's what we're at. The point is that whenever there's an application in front of the planning board, it's a hearing, but it's not a public hearing, so to speak. But
You're right, it's a permit review process.
The
That's
only
very well
difference between
defined.
public hearing and hearing is that one is open to the public. But as soon as you call it a hearing, you're expecting a certain
And it
amount
is
of
open to the
legal
public.
process.
yeah. Well, go ahead, Herb, you wanted a comment, and I don't want to get into talking about the wedding venue. That's not what this is about.
Well, all right. Well, just basically what happens is somebody comes in with an application and they're in a district. There's no provision for notifications anywhere, and there still isn't in
Right.
town. So that's what we when somebody comes in, we can't say we like the project. We personally don't like it, or we do like it. We can't judge the application on that. All we do is pretty cut and dried. We go down the checklist and all the items that they have to criteria they have to meet. And we really can't deny them. They can go to, if we deny them, they'll go to the Board of Appeals and they'll have to give it to them. If the Board of Appeals don't give it to them, it will go to Superior Court. So we got to play by the rules that we have. And that's what, in that case, the wedding bond was what we did. So there's nothing done incorrectly there. As far as notifications goes, there was no requirement for notifications, writing letters.
I do want to correct you on that. There is requirement for notification, and notification was made through the normal processes.
Yeah, well, yes, but written letters is what I'm saying, Jeff. There's no
So
requirement for that. I think that's what she's referring to.
there's a posting of the agenda, and that's done at the same place as the town posts all of their things. It's put onto the web. So there is public dissemination and notice of that meeting. What is not there is a mailing to individuals.
Correct.
Where we codify the individuals for the problem.
And I really would like to stay away from that particular issue, that's not the focus of today, that's not on the agenda.
That particular instance.
And there may be, and it may end up here. Right, so I think we should stay away from that.
Okay.
No, not you, just everybody.
No, I know. I'm just going to take this back, what I'm talking to you guys, back to the board, or I'll send them an email.
Yeah, and we can perhaps,
Discussion.
we're not gonna solve the issue today, but I did want to point, if I have a second, I want to point a couple things out in the bylaws versus the ordinance. And again, not looking for comments, but in the bylaws, it says, in the ordinance, it says associate members may attend meetings. And in the bylaws, it says that they are expected to attend. I found that a little bit in conflict. I also question the bylaws. Right in 2A, it says a vote of the planning board quorum may direct the action of the municipal offices to fill a permanent vacancy. No disrespect, but I'm not sure the planning board can vote to order the select board to do anything. Recommend and
Well,
ask.
I believe that came out of the old,
Well, maybe it
the
did.
prior
I
one.
don't-
So if you
I
want
don't
that
know where it
changed.
came from, but I'm not sure that that's appropriate, but
Okay,
but anyways, I'll write these up for you too.
okay.
And then just talked about that. It says notice of the regular meetings will be publicized on the town website and posted at the town office at least 5 days in advance. I'm fine with the 5 days. But you just said you post them around stores and post office and stuff. And
No, we do it at the town office.
I know you do a town office, but you also, I thought you did it in other places too. Is that not the case?
We have,
Yeah.
yes.
But the way this is written, maybe this is just minimal. But again, it comes back to the notice thing. I mean, I think that the select board meetings, we post in certain places. I think we should be consistent as a town personally. And that can change because you can have a business that goes out of business. You know what I mean? But
Right.
But anyway, just again, not looking for answers tonight, but the can't find it, but somewhere in here it says in your bylaws that the planning board can hire a note taker. Term was in the budget.
Right.
But the only under state law, the only body that can hire in this town is the Board of Selectmen. So that really should probably say recommend to hire.
Okay.
We have to vote, whether it's a junior firefighter, we have to vote on it,
Okay.
correct? As we
None
learned.
of that stuff is difficult to change or.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting it is. I'm just, but if I don't point.
Uh-oh. You guys are frozen. Can you hear me?